So we're now going to hear from two definitely differently experienced leaders representing different offices of state from two parts of the world. We're hoping, in fact, to extend that to three parts of the world, but I do know that at the moment, Smriti Irani from India is in a cabinet meeting. So, first of all, I am delighted to welcome to our real stage. Last year it was virtual, but this year we have a real, the Right Honourable Priti Patel, Secretary of State for the Home Department. Thank you so much for being with us, Home Secretary. I'll invite you to give some opening remarks.
Well, thanks for making this possible, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. And obviously to join in this global forum to talk about some of the issues that matter to so many of us. And, you know, when it comes to women empowerment, the role of women in leadership, that's just so important. And of course, when we look at women in business, but also politics, public life, particularly post-pandemic, there is so much more that we can do. So your panel alone is really exciting, obviously in terms of speaking to those who've been at the forefront of a great deal of work during the pandemic, but also serving in some very big and strategic leadership positions. There is always much more to do, and certainly from my perspective as the Home Secretary in the British government for the United Kingdom, there is just a raft of work that's taking place that I have the privilege of leading on as well. So the work that we do in terms of women and girls, domestic abuse, some of the more personal issues that clearly affect the day-to-day of some of women in the United Kingdom, British citizens, but then also to lean into, through forums like this, the global agenda, where we can affect and shape change, where we can influence, where we can, even through the G7 presidency, which the British government holds right now, do much more in terms of global empowerment of women, developing that agenda in terms of economic empowerment, doing much more for girls in particular. Our Prime Minister has a very strong agenda for girls' education. So these are some really important strands, some things that I think will touch upon all aspects of the debate discussion today. And I'm sure your other panellists as well will, you know, have some views on those areas.
Absolutely. Before we move over to Kenya, maybe pretend we could just talk about one of the other areas that you're involved in. We know that the UK and India recently signed a migration and mobility partnership. Can you tell me about the importance of this?
Of course. Well, this migration and mobility partnership, I mean, it's the first of its kind that has been agreed by our two great countries. And I think first and foremost, it very much speaks to the strength of our bilateral relationship. I mean, these agreements don't come out of thin air. We have to work hard. Both governments have to work hard in terms of the delivery and the content of those agreements. And what I would say, you know, someone also who's of Indian origin, so it's fair to say I may have a few insights from that perspective as well. This is a relationship that is one of equals. And I just fundamentally believe that, you know, our relationship at a bilateral level has been transformed, certainly across, with the Indian government, certainly over the last 10 years since my party has been in government in the United Kingdom. It's a very personal relationship. It's one that reflects very much the roots that we have with the diaspora community. But you've asked specifically about what that partnership will achieve. It is about people. The living bridge, as the Prime Minister of India himself speaks of, and my Prime Minister here, Boris Johnson, speaks very much about global Britain, and global Britain demonstrates that we're open, and that mobility partnership is very much about people-to-people ties. Students, people coming over here, young professionals, having the opportunity to live in the UK and work in the UK, and it's one of a partnership that's of the equal. So that's been reciprocated with Brits also going to India and having the same opportunities. And there are many other aspects as well that touch across the Home Affairs portfolio.
So what makes the UK a better alternative for bright young Indian talent than for where I'm from, the United States or Canada, Australia, the EU?
Well, a number of factors. First and foremost, that bilateral relationship is obviously key. The living bridge is part of that. But just to put this into some context as well, last year alone, we issued 56,000 visas, student visas, to students from India. That's a 13% increase from the previous years. That's also through the pandemic, so that's really quite something. I'm also launching our graduate route, and the graduate route basically enables the post-study route that I've heard for the last decade, in fact, for years and years, every time I've been to India, before I was even in the Home Office, and I've been a very, very strong advocate of this, as has the Prime Minister. So it's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom that has felt so personally passionate about this, that will effectively help to, bring the brightest and the best, the talent from India to the United Kingdom. And if I may just give, an anecdote, I've always spoken about, you go to parts of London, and I appreciate this is very different right now throughout the pandemic. You go to the Canary Wharf, you go to the City of London, you could close your eyes and you would almost hear every single Indian dialect being spoken and echoed, which I find, I think that's great. I think it's great. It speaks to global Britain, it speaks to the diversity of our country. But these are the people that were once students in the United Kingdom who are now living and working and contributing to the economic harmony and fabric of the UK. That's what this route will do, the graduate route, the post-study work route as well. That's why I'm absolutely convinced the United Kingdom will be the place for Indian students to come and study, but also work and effectively contribute in the long run. And that speaks, I think, very much to AR openness, shared values, the shared values matter a lot, but also to the heritage and the roots that we have here in the United Kingdom with the Indian community.
Thank you, Home Secretary. Let's go over to our remote panelist. We've got Ambassador Amina Mohamed, the Cabinet Secretary for Sports, Heritage and Culture in Kenya. I'd love you to say a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced over the last few months, and especially what you think the opportunities are now.
Have been, I think, similar to those that have been suffered, by all of us across the globe. Whether it is the lockdowns and the attendant disruption of markets and supply chains, whether it's the loss of income, the impact on health, and especially the impact on the health of women, the whole, all the issues around unpaid work, and that it mostly affects women since they're caregivers, and they are the ones who manage different homes, whether it's the home for the elderly or their own specific environments and households. So the impact has been really amazing. It's been great. We have been in Kenya put a lot of measures in place. I think we're one of the first countries that started a process of very, very specific and time-sensitive lockdowns to just make sure that we broke the cycle, but we did not completely destroy the economy, although obviously all our economies were on a downturn. We also put some measures in place. Many women are frontline workers, as you know, nurses and caregivers, and therefore we decided that they would be not only vaccinated first, but they would also have, the priority access to PPEs. We put financial measures in place, allowing credit to women-led businesses, because we also realized that one of the sectors that was most hard hit was the services sector, which employs predominantly women. And so women lost, more women lost their jobs than men did. And obviously the statistics were there to prove that as well. And so very, very quickly the government decided that if we, the little that we had to be deliberate and targeted. And targeting women became something that we needed to do. And so we did that. We also made sure that since most of our school going children were homeschooling, that would make it much easier for women, even those that were in jobs that demanded physical presence, would get some level of distance, working, remote working. So it's affected everybody, I think. And it's really important that not just nationally, but globally as well, that we put deliberate measures in place. And what I talked about, access to credit, loans and grants, and especially to the sectors where the workers are majority women, expanding social protection systems, And currently many of our women do not have access to social protection, as you would probably know. And the minister, Priti, would know that very, very well, because I think she deals with issues around some of our countries. 74% of our women are in formal sectors, and those were really hard hit. And so we really needed to make sure that any measures that were taken targeted especially those that did not have the same level of protection that others did, those that lost their and were more vulnerable, lost their jobs faster than the rest of the population did, and that were much more vulnerable. We also saw, just in terms of the health of women, we saw that there was much more domestic violence, and I think that has already been mentioned before. But the levels, the statistics are frightening. They really are frightening. During this period of the pandemic, we saw teenage pregnancies just go through the roof. We saw girls stop their education completely because they had to start looking after babies. The 2 years have been disastrous in terms of just the fight against teenage pregnancies, the fight against FGM, the fight against sexual violence. These 2 years have been disastrous. They've taken us so much, further than where we should have been. We have lost a lot of the gains that we made since Beijing. So I think that the impact has been really adverse. We need to all think together and look at measures that would support women in the short term, so that we don't lose the SDG 5 that we are also attached to, and then make sure that women also understand that explicit attention is actually being paid to their issues. Introducing measures that will actually alleviate tax burdens, for instance, in all our countries. Measures that would integrate agenda assessment in all our country assessments, just to understand that economic impact that all of us are talking about. And then making sure that those government and governments and businesses that have been affected that are women-led, the sectors that are women-led, that those are also given deliberate, attention. The expectation is that if we all worked together, rebalanced, for instance, the unpaid labor between men and women, just by offering different types of incentives, making sure that we offer childcare infrastructure, so that women can feel much more, much better about going back to work now that some of the situations are beginning to ease in some of our countries, with, of course, the introduction of vaccines and people getting vaccinated. Making sure that we have tax policies that are actually supportive of the challenges of that women are facing. And so I think that there's a raft of measures that we can put in place. I think it's important that we all start thinking along the same lines. What can we specifically do in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term to support women who have actually been much more adversely affected by the pandemic than everybody else.
So I think our next question is actually going to speak directly to that. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible, so we're including some questions that have come through from the people watching. We have a question from Australia that I'd love to play to you to answer.
My name is Lady Street, Penny Street from Sydney, Australia. I started a company over 30 years ago now called Narrowcasters, and we provide audio guide services into visited sites around the world, but principally Asia and South Asia. And my question is, the coronavirus has presented multiple socio-economic challenges across the globe, and we're all aware of this. Women all over the world have been hit the hardest in terms of gender equality. What is needed to turn this around for good?
All right. So what is needed to turn it around?
That's just a fabulous question. It really is. And, I actually just want to say it's great to be with Amina today on this panel because of the work that she has led very much to deal with and address actually the inequality of women around the world. And this does come back to the Sustainable Development Goals. I think a lot of this does, no question about that. Amina has made the point that, we made some great gains in the past over, the last 7-8 years. The pandemic has had such a detrimental impact that we are going backwards. Amina also mentioned gender-based violence, which is obviously a big issue. However, what do we do to get us out of this, and how do we move forward? So I'm going to come back to just the G7 and some of the work actually of the G7. Amina will be familiar with some of this too, around how we actually focus on economic development, opportunity, even access to capital and to finance for women, microfinance. Look at microfinance. I'm sure Amina can speak about, microfinance in Kenya, initiatives such as M-Pesa, which, are still thriving and basically have given women the chance to be economically empowered so that they're not at home. So that they're simply not at home, they're not subject to abuse, so that girls themselves are actually encouraged to go to school and given the opportunities, because we need to create the pathways. It's our responsibility for governments and countries like our own. We have the resources that we use in a very focused and targeted way to create opportunities to help actually girls and women to move forward. And we can only do this in a unified way. There's no point doing a little bit here and a little bit there. And, our mission certainly through the G7, and Amina is very, very familiar with this. I think she will speak equally as passionately. When you think about even the last 5 years, whether it's girls' education, jobs and growth for women, starting in the communities, and then supplementing that by, where we can, yes, the bigger companies that actually go and establish businesses, factories, manufacturing capabilities, invest in the skills and development of women. That's effectively what we want. I think actually we need much more a playbook, the blueprint as to how to do this. And I say this, I've said this recently as well, as the first Secretary of State for DFID that put forward an economic development strategy. If only we could hardwire that around the world and work with other partners, because that was all about education, skills, empowerment and investing in people, and that has to be the way forward.
Amina, could you speak to some of that and talk specifically around maybe the microfinance issue, and also around some of the projects that you've seen make the biggest impact with the women and girls in Kenya?
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I could just repeat exactly what the Right Honourable Priti Patel has said, and we would be done with that question, because everything she has said is actually the most appropriate response that you could give. That we need to develop skills, that we need to empower young girls. I worked on that with the Right Honourable Prime Minister for a while when he was Foreign Secretary, and then again when he was already occupying the office that he occupies now, together with the Minister for Education of the UK, on how we were going to get girls, the 350 million girls that were out of school, back into school, what we needed to do, what specific measures we needed to put in place, what incentives we needed to give, and to make sure that these girls actually stayed in school, because it wasn't about going to school, it's about staying in school. So we've done quite a bit of work around that, and I think it would take too long to discuss it. But I think there are specific measures that we can take now, and the question was about what we could do to support those women that were actually getting, the services that the good lady was offering remotely, and that cannot do that now. And again, it's because of the unpaid work that they need to do. Support their children in school, because their children can no longer go to school, they have to mostly homeschool. Support their elderly parents, and I think that's true for Asia and Africa, and more than any other part of the world, where we support our elderly parents. We are the caregivers as women, and therefore everything else becomes secondary to that. Primary priority becomes our children and our elderly parents and our grandparents and people around the communities that actually need our support, our help, to survive the pandemic. And so I think that, to answer our question, we just need to be deliberate in the way that we address the challenges that women face. If it's about, information the provision of information remotely, then we must make sure that we put in place infrastructure that can support those women's children, for 1 hour, 2 hours a day, while they can access the services that are being provided from Australia and from other countries. So it will have to be deliberate. It will have to be an investment in people, as Priti said, and we really have to be much more predictable than we are. Governments plan long term, and it's very, very difficult, therefore, to kind of break that long term plan to address, emergencies and priorities that occur from time to time. But we need to do that better. We need to adapt better. We need to adapt faster. We need to work smarter. If we do that, then we'll be able to address some of the issues that the good lady, brought up. Because I think that the services that she's providing are very, very relevant and needed in Asia, for instance, where she's been doing this. So governments there and the corporate sector there need to come together, and we have a really wonderful framework in Kenya of public-private partnership, where we actually go to our corporate sector and say, listen, this is how much as government we can provide. What can you do to support that? Been very, very generous. They've supported what we are doing. So maybe that would be a wonderful case of doing this now. She says, do it once and for all and for good. I don't know whether that can happen overnight. That would have to be put into, like I said, get a gender assessment and integrate that into the all country assessments to just understand what the economic impacts are, but also look at what the solutions are. How can we address this? How can we deal with this in the long term? So the short answer is basically we have to continue investing in skills, in empowering women, in education, in awareness creation, in sensitization of women, in fighting some of the practices that adversely affect women. FGM is one, is another, sexual violence is another. So we need to be deliberate, we need to invest, and hopefully, all of us coming together. Again, it can't be just one country addressing these issues. We all have to develop some synergies and collaborate in addressing these issues. It won't help us if just one country is able to deal with the challenges that women face. It has to be global, it has to be regional.
Thank you. I mean, the great news is 193 countries actually signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 5, my favorite, gender equality. Home Secretary, I'd love you to say more about what we've got an audience of global business. What can business do more to support this goal of gender equality and also to reverse some of what we've seen during the pandemic?
Well, absolutely. I think it's a sharp question, really. And Amina's used a lovely word, which is, be deliberate. And I think actually that's a big message to governments, because there are lots of reasons as to why you can't do things rather than you can do things. But we have to be deliberate and very conscientious in the outcomes that we want to drive. And the role of business is absolutely crucial. It's critical. At the end of the day, business creates jobs, it creates economic opportunities. Businesses, private sector employ people. Amina's given the great example of the public-private partnerships that are taking place in Kenya and growing around the world. We need much more of that. And I also think, if we just speak in the development terms and the economic empowerment terms of women and girls, we do have much of the infrastructure is there. But again, how do we nuance it and make it agile post-pandemic to respond? So, for example, finance. Finance matters. Finance matters if you want to start a business up. No question about that, microfinance. But actually, if you're a big multinational watching this and listening today, then, as part of that Build Back Better post the pandemic, think about your business footprint. Now, I have worked in Africa in the private sector, and I've been there as part of a job creation initiative as well, building factories, skilling people up, looking at the range of skills, how to keep people employed and how to do that on a sustained footing. This is where we very much look to the initiatives of the private sector, but how we can work in collaboration with them. And then, of course, a central tenet to this, which is also linked to government work, will be trade policy. And as we liberalise, open up, and I think there are some very significant and stark lessons to learn post-pandemic. Countries looked inwards during the pandemic rather than being global in their outlook, and rather than, putting out the hand of friendship. We saw all sorts of practices take place at national government levels and also from a business perspective, we have to stand together, we have to be much more open. And so on that basis, the private sector and businesses, hopefully many of them, those who are joining us today, will be part of that trend, leaning back out into the world, helping to shape the future global economy, because it is a global economy, just as this is a global forum. And that is how we can create opportunities on that sustained footing together.
Thank you. I wonder, Amina, if you had a response to that as well. Any more on what business you'd like business to do in terms of partnership?
And I think that Priti has responded to that as well. Businesses have to stop being restrictive. They must be open to carrying on trading as they did before the pandemic. Those restrictions have hurt trade across the world, and so they need to really stay open, but also develop some friendly policies, friendly family work policies, for instance, to provide flexibility in programs, make them even part-time to support workers that are experiencing challenges. They can rethink their performance reviews and promotions, as well as senior and middle management buy-in to ensure widespread adoption of changes. They can nurture a professionalized childcare industry, which is not obvious in our countries. I think it's much more obvious in some other countries, especially in the countries of Northern Europe. In the Scandinavian countries, I think there you have a professionalized childcare industry. I think we need to develop that, because we know that because of the challenges of just being caregivers, we are inappropriately and disproportionately affected. Introduce measures, again, the tax measures, those are amazing, and they're very, they offer the incentives that are required. So all the things that Priti said, and I think in addition, just to look at new policies that can be put in place by businesses to adopt the changes that are occurring, and these changes are not going away soon. I think all of us had hoped that it would be over in a few months, and then we thought it would be over as soon as we got the vaccine. And now we're realizing that even with the 2 doses, you are still challenged. So basically, I think that we need to start adopting as quickly as possible, working much, much smarter, and in a much more flexible and agile manner.
I want to just stay with that idea around vaccines, Amina, and look at that, because I have a podcast. I've interviewed many frontline healthcare workers, including some in Kenya. Their message was, we need them faster than they're coming. Can you give us an update on how that is doing in your country, how those frontline healthcare workers, and also the most vulnerable? And then the next part is women who need to go back to work. What percentage of women are now vaccinated?
Well, first of all, I think it's true that they're not coming as fast as they should, and I think that applies again to many of us who did not order at the beginning of the pandemic, and make it impossible for the rest to get any percentage of vaccines to their country. So I think that we have serious challenges in accessing vaccine, and people have called that different names, but I just think I think it's very unfortunate. It's very regrettable that when we were ordering vaccines for our countries, we did not think that the rest of the world needed it. So we are hoping that now we can get the vaccines that we need. We were able to vaccinate about 1 million of our people. Again, we prioritized healthcare frontline workers because we knew that we needed them to deal with anybody who either fell ill or in other cases as well. And we wanted to make sure that we did not also completely postpone the treatment of other diseases. People needed to be supported, not just those that are suffering from COVID, others as well. And so we needed to make sure that the healthcare workers were vaccinated first. And so we did that. And then, like everybody else, we went down the age bracket, beginning with the eldest, to the middle-aged, and then now moving downwards. And so we've had about 1 million Kenyans vaccinated. We just received additional vaccines about 350,000 of them. We are hoping to get another, I think, million vaccines coming in. And we have ordered the Johnson and Johnson vaccine as well. So hopefully, the president, in an address yesterday, said that by the middle of next year, we should have vaccinated, I think, about 50 to 60 to 70% of the population, depending on how fast we get the vaccines. So now the situation is, I think, easing up because we are talking to each other and we're beginning to understand where the pinches, the shoe pinches hardest, and to understand also that we are in this together. It doesn't matter whether your country is completely vaccinated, as long as your neighbor is not fully vaccinated, then your risk levels remain the same. I mean, they're not reduced, considerably. So it's important that all of us are vaccinated to a level where we then have herd immunity in all our countries, so that we can continue with businesses, our children can go back to school, we can go back to some level of normalcy. Because we can't continue having these lockdowns. Yeah, I mean, we open up for a few weeks and then again we're going to lockdown. We open up for a few days, go back into lockdown. I don't think we can sustain this for too long. I think we can do this in the short term, maybe even in the medium term, but we cannot continue. It's just not sustainable in the long term. And so vaccines are the answers. I mean, at least that's according to every scientist and every doctor that I've talked to. And so we need to get these vaccines manufactured and delivered to those that need them.
I wonder if you think, Home Secretary, that enough is being done on this vaccine inequality issue.
So, this is just, I think, probably the hardest moment for the world, actually, when we look at the impact of the pandemic. And I know you've had other speakers, speaking about the vaccine, and, we're very proud of our contribution to the global effort, and I think we should be. So the resources that we put into COVAX, and obviously, we did resource the original research as well into the development of the vaccine. The fact of the matter is, I think we are at this stage now. Amina has, really articulated this well in terms of the number of vaccines going into countries such as Kenya, but then actually aggregate that around the world to some of the really challenging parts of the world, and also parts of the world where poverty is still endemic, income inequality is still a problem. We have all the issues from a gender perspective. We're going backwards, it's regressive. So when you absolutely pull that all together, it will have a regressive impact in terms of the health and well-being of parts of the world and the population. So it's in all our interests. It's a moral good. Absolutely, this is public good, moral good, where we certainly from the British government will continue to support everyone on the vaccine effort. But actually we need to see greater collaborations. And just, if I may, coming back to your point about the private sector, what better opportunity in a really fast time way to start looking at how, capacity can be grown in countries. We're going to be living with this virus, but there'll be future pandemics. And some countries learned from previous pandemics. I worked in the private sector when SARS hit parts of Asia, and we all changed our ways of working, business travel and things of that nature. But some countries were slightly more prepared. Therefore, we have to build in that resilience. This, from a British government perspective, this comes to our agenda of building back better. But there's shared learnings here. It's not about one country versus the other. We have to bring that shared learning together. We can only do this through global forums as well. So, we will continue to play our role and part in the world as Global Britain, no question about that. But we need to bring best practice, learnings, look at investment opportunities for manufacturing capabilities in country, which when you overlay that with skills, investing in people, actually, the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, could actually advance, some of the earlier issues we were speaking about, investing in people, skills, training, and giving women and others the opportunity to be part of that future.
You mentioned inequality in other parts of the world. And of course, we have inequality in the richest parts of the world as well. The United States, where I'm from, here in the UK, where I'm also a citizen, also pay my taxes. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how immigrant women were affected during the pandemic and whether we saw inequality increase there as well, and what measures were being taken now to protect them.
Yeah, so I think, again, we always learn from, obviously, experiences that come forward. If we just think back to where we were a year ago with the pandemic, We were. Amina said, in lockdowns, we were having localised lockdowns, parts of the United Kingdom, certain local authority areas where we had actually immigrant communities. People from immigrant communities were being, affected by the pandemic. That was before the vaccine. And of course, we have always focused on making sure that those that need the vaccine, everyone needs the vaccine, but with the cohorts that first came together last year, late last year and then early on this year, that they were being vaccinated to protect themselves, but also people within the community. There's been a lot of work across this government, and there's work still taking place to make sure where we've had vaccine hesitancy amongst certain communities, that we continue to press the case for the vaccine. And again, then apply that internationally, the work that we've done here across other countries as well, where there might be reservations and hesitancy, that we say to everybody, take the vaccine, it will save your life, but save the lives of so many others. But you've also asked about overall poverty, equality issues. There is no doubt whatsoever, whether it's domestically or internationally, those that have needed help and support financially, we've put those financial mechanisms in place. So making sure we have a welfare system, universal credit, making sure access to that system has absolutely been resourced and supported, so that people that can't work are being supported. And of course, that was one of the first interventions this government put in place last year with our economic support package, and that came together as soon as we started to lock down the country. So that's March the 23rd last year, and we have sustained that. The furlough scheme was exactly the reason why we wanted to protect people from economic hardship, and putting those protections in place was a whole of government effort.
Amina, I want to come back to you briefly. Vaccine hesitancy, I know, is an issue in Kenya. Can you briefly update us on how that is and the work that you've done with women, Trust, at the center of Trust?
I think it was a bigger issue before. I think we've done a lot of work as government to just sensitize everybody on the importance of getting vaccinated. And so we have many more people, coming forward. Whenever we have vaccines, we see that there are queues of people waiting to be vaccinated. We actually have to, in some ways, being Minister of Sport now, and wanting to make sure that my sportsmen and women athletes who are going for the Olympics and for all these international events are actually vaccinated. Have been given, my own quota of the vaccines. And so for the Olympic team, for instance, the Kenyan Olympic team, we've already, they've all had their 2 doses of vaccines before they leave, and they begin leaving very, very soon. So there's much more acceptance, I think, of, the vaccine than there was before. But it has taken a lot of work. I'm also in charge of culture, so we have to develop programs, we had to develop products, we had to encourage musicians to come up with different types of songs to just incentivize people to come forward. We had to prove that it wasn't dangerous to take this vaccine. Because there was a lot of misinformation that was going around. I think Priti, you know that quite well. And misinformation on what the impact of having the vaccine was going to be, and especially on young couples and in places like that. So I think we're much better today than we were last year in terms of just who will come forward and take the vaccine. Now we have queues developing all over the place. I think every time we have a certain number of vaccines made available, we consume them, before they expire, which is a good sign, I guess. So we're doing much better than we did. And there's much, I think, more awareness now than there was in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Amina Mohamed, for joining us. Thank you as well, Home Secretary.
Thank you.
We like to say on my podcast, in fact, spread the facts, not the virus. So that's exactly what we've done here. Thank you as well to our audience for joining us, and do please share what you've heard using the hashtag FutureNow.